The metal cuffs weren't just tight, they were cutting into her skin. A 19-year-old girl sat in seat 1A of the first-class cabin, head bowed, tears silently streaming down her face as a steady drip of blood fell from her wrists onto the pristine beige carpet. The lead flight attendant smirked, thinking she had just secured the cabin from a hooligan. The air marshal thought he was a hero. But the silence that followed wasn't compliance. It was the calm before a nuclear storm. Because the Gulfstream jet that just requested an emergency landing didn't belong to the police. It belonged to the girl's father. And when the doors opened, the flight crew wouldn't be greeting a passenger. They would be facing the owner of the entire airline. And he wasn't coming to negotiate. It was a Tuesday afternoon at JFK International Airport, the kind of grey, humid day that makes air travel feel like a chore before you even step on the plane. Flight 902 on Sovereign Air, bound for London Heathrow, was already 20 minutes behind schedule. The mood at the gate was tense. Maya Sterling, 19 years old, adjusted her oversized grey hoodie and pulled her noise-cancelling headphones down around her neck. She looked exhausted. She had just finished a grueling 2-week architecture internship in New York and was flying home to London to surprise her parents. She wasn't dressed like the typical first-class passenger. She wore baggy sweatpants, beat-up sneakers that happened to be limited edition vintage, and a hoodie that looked like something picked up from a thrift store, though it was actually high-end streetwear. She approached the priority boarding lane. Standing at the podium was Sheila Vance. Sheila had been a gate agent and occasional flight attendant for 30 years. She wore her uniform like armor and her bitterness like a badge of honor. She had a strict internal list of what a first-class passenger looked like: suits, briefcases, pearls, and grey hair. They certainly didn't look like Maya. As Maya stepped up to the priority scanner, Sheila didn't even look at the boarding pass in Maya's hand. She looked at Maya's face, then at her hoodie. "Excuse me, miss," Sheila said, her voice dripping with that fake customer service sweetness that barely masks contempt. "Zone 5 boarding is that way. We're currently only boarding first class and diamond status members." Maya, tired and running on 3 hours of sleep, just held up her phone. "I know, I'm in seat 1A. Sheila actually laughed. It was a dry, short sound. "Honey, 1A is reserved for full fare priority. Please step aside so the actual first-class passengers can board. You're blocking the lane." Behind Maya, a tall man in a bespoke suit, Mr. Henderson, a regular, cleared his throat. Maya felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but she was too tired to fight. "Scan the code," Maya said softly. "Please, just scan it." Sheila sighed, rolling her eyes openly at her colleague, a younger agent named Ben who looked uncomfortable. "Fine. Let's get this over with so you can see you're in the wrong zone." Sheila snatched the phone from Maya's hand, her fingernails scratching Maya's palm, and aggressively shoved it under the scanner, expecting the angry red light of a rejection. Beep. The light flashed green. The screen read, "Passenger, Sterling, M. Seat, 1A. Status, VIP executive." Sheila froze. The machine didn't lie, but Sheila's prejudice was stronger than the computer system. She stared at the screen, then back at Maya. Instead of apologizing, her eyes narrowed. "System glitch," Sheila muttered. "It happens. Probably an upgrade error. Go ahead on board, but don't get comfortable. I'll have to verify this with the manifest once we're airside." She shoved the phone back at Maya, refusing to make eye contact. Maya took a deep breath, took her phone, and walked down the jet bridge. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. Once on board the Boeing 777, Maya found her seat. 1A, the best seat on the plane, a private pod with a lie-flat bed. She stowed her battered duffel bag in the overhead bin and collapsed into the seat, immediately pulling a blanket over herself. She just wanted to sleep. The first-class cabin began to fill up. Businessmen, socialites, the usual crowd. Maya kept her head down, scrolling through her phone. 10 minutes later, Sheila Vance marched onto the plane. She was the lead flight attendant for this transatlantic leg. When she saw Maya actually sitting in Hue, sipping a pre-flight water, Sheila's jaw tightened. To Sheila, Maya was an anomaly, a glitch, a stain on the perfect aesthetic of her first-class cabin. Sheila walked over, looming over Maya. "Ticket!" Sheila barked. "No, please! No, ma'am!" Maya looked up, startled. "I showed it at the gate. I need to see it again. Physical copy if you have it. Systems are acting up," Sheila lied. Her voice was loud enough that the other passengers stopped arranging their luggage to watch. Maya fumbled for her phone. "I only have digital." She brought the QR code up again. Sheila barely glanced at it. "This doesn't prove payment. We've had a lot of credit card fraud lately, involving young travelers." She let the implication hang in the air like a bad smell. "I need to see the credit card used to book this seat." "My father booked it," Maya said quietly. "It was a corporate booking. I don't have his card." "A corporate booking," Sheila scoffed, "for a teenager in a hoodie." "Listen to me, miss. I have a Diamond Medallion member, Mr. Dawson, who is currently waitlisted for an upgrade. He paid full fare. Unless you can produce the card, I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy. Row 42 has space." "No," Maya said. Her voice shook slightly, but she held her ground. "I'm not moving. This is my seat. You can check the manifest. Call operations." "I am operations on this flight," Sheila snapped. "And I decide who is a security risk. A passenger refusing to verify payment details is a risk. I'm not a risk, I'm a customer." "Lower your voice," Sheila yelled, though Maya hadn't raised hers. "You are disturbing the other passengers." From across the aisle, a middle-aged woman with a tight facelift and heavy jewelry leaned over. "Just move, dear. You clearly don't belong up here. We're trying to have a peaceful flight." Maya felt the walls closing in. "I'm not moving." Sheila pressed the call button on her handset. "Officer Garrett to the forward cabin. We have a non-compliant passenger." The air in the cabin shifted. It went from an argument to an incident. Rick Garrett was the air marshal on board. He was a man who missed being a beat cop, where he could use physical force without so much paperwork. He hulked into the first-class cabin, his eyes scanning for a threat. He saw Sheila pointing a manicured finger at the small, frightened girl in seat 1A. "She's refusing crew instructions, Rick. Possible fraud. She's becoming aggressive." Garrett didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for Maya's side of the story. He saw a threat that fit a profile he didn't like. "Ma'am, get up," Garrett ordered, his hand resting near his waist. "I paid for this seat," Maya pleaded, tears welling up now. "My name is Maya Sterling. Please just check the computer properly." "I said get up!" Garrett reached into the pod, grabbed Maya by the upper arm, and yanked. Maya wasn't big. She weighed maybe 115 pounds. Garrett was over 200. She flew out of the seat, stumbling into the aisle. Her phone clattered to the floor. "You're hurting me!" she cried out. "Resisting!" Garrett shouted. "She's resisting!" He spun her around. Maya, terrified and acting on instinct, tried to pull her arm back. That was all Garrett needed. He slammed her chest first against the bulkhead wall. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull thud of bone against plastic laminate. "Stop!" a man from row 3 yelled. "Mr. Henderson, the man from the gate. She's just a kid." "Stay back, sir!" Garrett roared. "Federal jurisdiction!" He grabbed Maya's wrists and twisted them behind her back, forcing them high up her shoulder blades. Maya screamed in pain. "Stop struggling! I'm not! Maya sobbed. Garrett pulled out a pair of zip-tie flex cuffs. He didn't use the standard metal ones yet. He used the heavy-duty plastic restraints meant for terrorists. He cinched them around her wrists. He pulled them tight. Too tight. He didn't stop there. He dragged her to the jump seat near the galley, right where the passengers boarded, putting her on display. "Sit," he commanded, shoving her down. "And don't make a sound." The plane didn't leave the gate. The commotion had caused a delay in the pushback sequence. The captain, a man named Roger Fryer, came out of the cockpit. He looked at Maya, who was hunched over on the jump seat, sobbing, her head on her knees. "What's the situation?" Captain Fryer asked Sheila. "She was belligerent, Captain." Sheila lied smoothly, refused to show ID, refused to move seats, and then physically resisted Officer Garrett. "We need her off." Captain Fryer looked at Maya. He saw a teenager in a hoodie. He didn't see the daughter of a billionaire. He saw a delay. "Get the Port Authority on the line. Have them come drag her off so we can make our slot." But there was a problem. The heavy-duty zip ties Garrett had used were defective, or perhaps he had just pulled them with sadistic force. The plastic edge had bitten deep into the soft tissue of Maya's wrists. As Maya sat there, the adrenaline wore off, and the pain set in. It was a burning, searing fire. The plastic had sliced through the skin. "It cuts," Maya whispered. "It's cutting me." "Quiet," Garrett snapped from where he stood guarding her. "Please," she begged, looking up. Her face was streaked with mascara and tears. "My hands, they're numb." A drop of bright crimson blood slid from under the plastic cuff. It tracked down her hand, over her fingers, and dripped onto the floor. Then another drop. Then a steady trickle. Mr. Henderson, the passenger in row 3, stood up again. "She's bleeding, for God's sake! Look at her hands!" Sheila walked over, looked at the blood, and actually rolled her eyes. "She's doing it to herself, trying to get sympathy." "She's handcuffed," Henderson shouted. "How can she do it to herself?" "Sir, sit down or you will join her," Garrett warned, stepping toward the cabin. Maya felt faint. The circulation was being cut off. Her hands were turning a terrifying shade of purple, contrasting with the bright red blood dripping onto her vintage sneakers. She needed to do something. She needed her dad. But her phone was on the floor of seat 1A. "My phone," Maya whispered. "Siri, call Dad." She hoped the voice activation would work from this distance. It was a long shot, but the phone was still on the floor of the pod, just 10 feet away. "Calling Dad," the robotic voice echoed faintly from the floor of seat 1A. Sheila heard it. She rushed to grab the phone to cancel the call, but she was too slow. The call connected. Maya screamed as loud as she could toward the phone. "Dad, Dad, help me! They're hurting me! Sovereign Air 902, Dad!" Sheila snatched the phone up and smashed the end call button. She turned to Maya, her face twisted in rage. "That is enough. You are in serious trouble, little girl." Maya slumped back against the jump seat wall. She felt cold. She closed her eyes. What Sheila didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the call had connected for exactly 4 seconds. And on the other end of that line, Silas Sterling had been in a board meeting. He had heard his daughters scream. He had heard Sovereign Air 902. Silas Sterling didn't just have money, he had power. He was the majority shareholder of the investment firm that had acquired Sovereign Air just 3 days ago, a deal that hadn't been made public yet. Technically, he owned the plane she was sitting on, and he was currently in his private Gulfstream G6050, sitting on the tarmac at Teterboro, just 12 miles away. He didn't call the police. He called the tower. "This is Silas Sterling," he said into his satellite phone, his voice deadly calm. "I am declaring a security emergency on Sovereign Flight 902. Ground that plane. Do not let it take off. I am en route." Back on Flight 902, the captain's comms system crackled. "Flight 902, this is Tower. Hold position. Cancel taxi clearance immediately. You are ordered to hold on the hard stand." "Tower 902, Captain Fryer said, confused. "We have a passenger disturbance, but we are handling it. We're ready to offload." "Negative 902. You are grounded. Direct order from the FAA administrator. You are to keep all doors closed until further instruction. High priority arrival incoming." Sheila looked at the captain. "What's going on? Is it a terror threat?" Captain Fryer looked pale. "I don't know. But nobody stops a transatlantic flight like this unless it's the president." Maya sat by the door, the blood pooling around her sneakers, drifting in and out of consciousness. She knew he was coming. The silence inside Sovereign Air Flight 902 was unnatural. Usually, a grounded plane is a cacophony of groans, shifting bodies, and the sharp hiss of overhead vents. But the atmosphere had curdled. Every passenger in the first-class cabin was leaning forward, craning their necks to look at the galley. They were no longer annoyed by the delay. They were witnessing a tragedy, and they were paralyzed by the brutality of it. Maya had stopped crying. That was worse than the screaming. She sat slumped against the galley wall, her legs splayed awkwardly, her head resting against the metal cart storage. The blood from her wrists had pooled on the linoleum floor, a stark, dark red against the industrial grey. Her face was pale, waxy, and slick with a cold sweat. She was going into shock. Sheila Vance, however, was busy rewriting reality in her head. She was arranging napkins on a tray, studiously ignoring the girl bleeding 3 feet away from her. In Sheila's mind, she was the victim here. She was the one who had to deal with a disruptive youth. She was the one who would have to fill out the incident report. She convinced herself that the blood was exaggerated. A scratch, nothing more. "Captain," Sheila said, poking her head into the cockpit. "How long until the Port Authority gets here? The passengers are getting restless, and this girl is just taking up space." Captain Roger Fryer was staring out the side window of the cockpit, looking down at the tarmac. His face was the color of ash. "Sheila," he said, his voice trembling. "Come look at this." Sheila huffed, adjusting her scarf, and squeezed into the flight deck. "What is it? Did the stairs get stuck?" She looked out the window. It wasn't a police cruiser. It wasn't the Port Authority van. Racing across the tarmac, cutting directly across active taxiways, forcing a massive Airbus A380 to slam on its brakes, was a convoy of 3 matte black Cadillac Escalades. They had no airport markings. They had no flashing yellow lights. They moved with a predatory speed, ignoring every safety regulation of the airfield. Flanking them were 2 airport operations vehicles, but they weren't leading the convoy. They were chasing it, trying to catch up, their lights flashing frantically as if pleading with the black SUVs to slow down. "Who is that?" Sheila whispered. "I don't know," Fryer said. "But ground control just told me to cut the engines completely. They said the airfield is under a Priority 1 lockdown." The lead Escalade screeched to a halt right next to the forward fuselage of Flight 902. The doors flew open before the wheels had even stopped rolling. 4 men stepped out. 3 of them were massive, built like linebackers, wearing tactical suits that looked more military than private security. They wore earpieces and moved with lethal precision. The 4th man was different. He was tall, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Captain Fryer's annual salary. He didn't run. He walked. But his walk was terrifying. It was a stride of absolute, unbridled fury. He buttoned his jacket as he approached the mobile stairs that were still attached to the plane. It was Silas Sterling, Sheila squinted. Is that a diplomat? Why are they coming here for an unruly passenger? I don't think they're here for the passenger, Sheila, the captain said, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. I think they're here for us. A loud metallic thud echoed through the plane as heavy fists pounded on the closed cabin door. Open it, the captain ordered. We can't just open the door for strangers, Sheila protested. Security protocols. Open the damn door, Fryer roared, losing his composure for the first time in 20 years. Look at those men. Do you want them to blow it off the hinges? Sheila, trembling now, walked back to the galley. Rick Garrett, the air marshal, stood up from his seat, puffing out his chest. I'll handle this, Garrett grunted. Nobody boards my plane without authorization. Federal jurisdiction. He placed his hand on his holster, a gesture of dominance he had used 1,000 times. Sheila disarmed the door. She rotated the heavy handle. The door swung outward. The first thing Sheila felt was a wave of heat from the tarmac, followed instantly by a wave of freezing cold dread. Standing at the top of the stairs wasn't a police officer she could charm or bully. It was one of the security guards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow and eyes like flint. He didn't say a word. He simply stepped inside, looked at Sheila, and physically pushed her aside as if she were a curtain. Hey! Garrett shouted, stepping forward. Identify yourself! I am a federal air marshal. The guard didn't even slow down. He stepped into Garrett's space, grabbed the marshal by the lapels of his jacket, and slammed him back into the bulkhead wall with such speed that Garrett's head bounced off the plastic. Stand down, the guard said. His voice was low, gravelly, and brooked no argument. Or you will be removed. Garrett, winded and shocked, reached for his weapon. Don't, the guard warned. 2 more guards appeared behind him, their hands hovering over tasers. Garrett froze. He was outmatched, and he knew it. Then, the cabin fell silent. Silas Sterling stepped onto the plane. He didn't look at Garrett. He didn't look at Sheila. He didn't look at the stunned passengers in first class. He looked down. He saw the sneakers, the vintage limited editions he had bought his daughter for her birthday last month. He saw the grey sweatpants. And then he saw the blood. The air left the cabin. Silas stopped breathing for a second. He stared at the dark red puddle, then traced the drip line up to the hands of his only child. Her hands were purple, swollen, and bound behind her back with jagged plastic that had eaten into her flesh. Maya was barely conscious, her head lulled forward. Maya, Silas whispered. It was a broken sound, a sound of pure heartbreak. Maya's eyes fluttered open. She looked up, her vision blurry. Daddy? She croaked, her voice dry and cracked. Silas dropped to his knees. This titan of industry, this billionaire who moved markets with a phone call, fell to his knees on the dirty galley floor of a commercial airliner. He didn't care about his suit. He didn't care about the audience. I'm here, baby. I'm here, Silas said, his voice shaking. He reached out to touch her face, his hand trembling. I've got you. He looked at the zip ties. He saw the raw meat of her wrists exposed where the plastic had dug in. Silas stood up. When he turned around, the heartbreak was gone. In its place was a cold, demoniac rage that made Sheila Vance want to dissolve into the floor. Silas didn't scream. He didn't yell. He turned to the room at large, his eyes scanning until they landed on Sheila. Who? Silas asked. It was one word. Simple. Quiet. Sheila couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. Who did this to my daughter? Silas repeated, his voice rising just an octave, sharpening like a blade. Rick Garrett, recovering his breath, tried to regain control. Sir, you are interfering with a federal detention. That prisoner was non-compliant and posing a threat to the safety of... Silas moved faster than a man of his size should be able to. He closed the distance to Garrett in 2 strides. He didn't hit him. He just got right in his face, staring deep into the marshal's eyes. "A threat?" Silas spat the word out. "A 19-year-old art student is a threat to you?" "She refused to identify herself," Garrett barked, though his voice wavered. "She resisted." "She is Maya Sterling," Silas said, enunciating every syllable. "And do you know who I am?" "I don't care who you are," Garrett lied. "I am Silas Sterling," he said. He turned to Sheila. "And you're the lead, aren't you?" Sheila nodded, terrified. I was just following protocol. She wouldn't move seats. She didn't have the right ticket." "She had the ticket I bought for her," Silas said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Seat 1A. "The system," Sheila stammered. "The system said it was an error." "The system didn't say it was an error," Silas said, stepping closer to her until she backed up against the drink cart. "You decided it was an error. You looked at her skin, you looked at her clothes, and you decided she didn't belong in your world." Silas turned to his head of security. "Kane, cut them off. Now." Kane produced a massive pair of medical shears. He knelt beside Maya. With gentle precision, he slid the blade between the plastic and her lacerated skin. Snip. Maya gasped as the pressure released, the blood rushing back into her numb hands, causing agonizing pins and needles. She slumped forward into Kane's arms. "We need a medic," Silas shouted. "Now!" "Medics are inbound," Kane said, lifting Maya as if she were made of glass. "Sir, we need to get her off this plane." "No," Silas said. He stood in the center of the galley, blocking the exit. "Nobody leaves this plane yet. Not until I'm finished." The commotion had drawn the attention of the entire plane. People from economy were peeking through the curtains. The first-class passengers were recording on their phones. Captain Fryer stepped out of the cockpit. He saw the situation spiraling. He saw the blood on the floor. He saw the billionaire blocking the door. "Sir," Captain Fryer said, trying to sound authoritative, "I am the captain of this vessel. I must ask you to deplane your daughter so we can resolve this with the authorities. You are delaying a scheduled flight." Silas looked at the captain. He reached into his inside jacket pocket. Sheila flinched, thinking he was pulling a gun. Instead, he pulled out a folded document. It was thick, legal paper. He threw it at the captain. It hit Roger Fryer in the chest and fell to the floor. "Read it," Silas commanded. The captain hesitated, then bent down to pick it up. He unfolded the document. His eyes scanned the header. Notice of acquisition and transfer of assets. Buyer, Sterling Capital Holdings. Asset, Sovereign Airlines Global Fleet. Effective date, immediate. The captain's hands started to shake. He looked up at Silas, his face draining of all color. "You," the captain whispered. "You bought us?" "I bought the controlling stake 72 hours ago," Silas said, his voice booming now, filling the cabin. "The press release goes out tomorrow morning. But as of this moment, I own this plane. I own the fuel in the wings. I own the seats you are sitting in." He turned to Sheila, whose smirk had been replaced by a mask of pure horror. "And," Silas continued, stepping toward her, "I own your employment contracts." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The glitch in the system hadn't been an error. It had been the system recognizing the daughter of the CEO, a status Sheila had been too prejudiced to acknowledge. I didn't know," Sheila whimpered. "Mr. Sterling, please." She didn't say. She just had a hoodie. "You judged her," Silas interrupted. "You profiled her. And because she didn't fit your little idea of what wealth looks like, you let a brute," he gestured to Garrett, torture her. Silas pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "This is Sterling," he said into the phone. "Go ahead, Mr. Sterling," a voice answered. It was the CEO of the private security firm that contracted the air marshals. "I'm on flight 902. Your man, Garrett, just assaulted a passenger. He caused severe bodily harm. He used high-security restraints on a 19-year-old girl without cause. We will launch an internal investigation immediately, sir," the voice said. "No," Silas said. "You will fire him. Right now. Or I cancel the entire security contract for the airline. That's a $40 million contract." There was a pause. "Garrett is terminated effective immediately. We will cooperate fully with the police prosecution." Silas hung up. He looked at Garrett. "You're not a marshal anymore. You're just a man who assaulted a minor in a metal tube, and the NYPD is waiting at the bottom of those stairs." Garrett looked around, panic setting in. He realized he had no badge to hide behind anymore. Silas then turned his attention back to the crew. He looked at the captain. "You," Silas said. "You're the captain. Your job is to protect the souls on board. Did you check on her? Did you ask why she was bleeding?" I trusted my lead flight attendant," the captain stammered. "Then you are unfit to command," Silas said coldly. "Get your bags. Get off my plane." "You can't do this," the captain protested. "Union rules." "I can do whatever I want," Silas said. "I'll pay the union fines. I'll pay the lawsuit settlements. I have more money than God, Captain. I will spend every dime I have to make sure you never fly anything bigger than a kite again. Get off!" The captain, humiliated and broken, grabbed his flight bag and squeezed past Silas, keeping his head down as he exited the plane. Now it was just Sheila. She was backed into the corner of the galley, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. "Mr. Sterling, please. I have a pension. I have 2 years left until retirement. I made a mistake." Silas looked at her with zero sympathy. He looked at the blood on the floor. Blood she had stepped over. "A mistake is spilling coffee," Silas said. "What you did was malice. You enjoyed it. I saw your face when I walked in. You were proud of yourself." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Sheila wailed. Silas leaned in close. "You aren't sorry you hurt her. You're sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you got caught." He turned to the passengers in first class, who were watching with wide eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas announced, "I apologize for the delay. This flight is cancelled. However, another aircraft is being prepared for you at Gate 12. You will all receive full refunds and travel vouchers." He pointed at Sheila. "Except her." Silas turned to Kane. "Escort my daughter to the car, and make sure the police officers outside know that I am pressing charges against Ms. Vance for assault, false imprisonment, and negligence. I want her walked off this plane in the same cuffs she put on Maya." Sheila gasped. You can't put me in cuffs." "Kine," Silas said, ignoring her. "Do we have the zip ties?" Kine held up the bloody plastic loop he had cut off Maya's wrists. "Use those," Silas said darkly. Kane stepped forward. Sheila screamed, but the security guard spun her around. "You're hurting me," Sheila shrieked, echoing the exact words Maya had used 20 minutes earlier. "Funny how that works," Silas said, watching without blinking. As Kane marched a sobbing, handcuffed Sheila Vance toward the door, Silas bent down and picked up Maya's phone from where it had been kicked under a seat. He wiped a speck of blood off the screen. He walked down the stairs, leaving the empty, silent plane behind him. But the nightmare wasn't over for the crew. It was just beginning. Because Silas Sterling wasn't done with them yet. He was going to make sure the world knew exactly what happened on Flight 902. The physical wounds on Maya Sterling's wrists were stitched and bandaged within hours at Mount Sinai Hospital, but the digital wounds inflicted on Sheila Vance and Rick Garrett were just beginning to fester. While Maya lay in a private VIP suite, sedated to manage the pain of nerve damage in her hands, the world outside was catching fire. Silas Sterling had been true to his word. He hadn't confiscated the phones of the other first-class passengers. In fact, he had encouraged them to keep their footage. By 8 p.m. that evening, a video titled "Flight Attendant Tortures Black Teen in First Class" hit TikTok. Within an hour, it had 3 million views. By midnight, it was on CNN. The video was damning. It showed the specific moment Sheila Vance rolled her eyes while Maya bled on the floor. It showed Garrett, the air marshal, slamming a 115-pound girl against the wall. But the pièce de résistance was the audio. The silence of the cabin allowed the microphone to pick up Maya's whimpering plea. "It cuts. It's cutting me." And Sheila's cold, dismissive response. "She's doing it to herself." The internet did what the internet does best. It hunted. Sheila Vance, currently sitting in a holding cell at the Queen's Precinct, had no idea that her face was now the global thumbnail for racism and incompetence. Her home address in New Jersey had already been leaked. News vans were parked on her lawn. Her Facebook page, filled with posts about respecting authority, was being flooded with hundreds of thousands of comments. 3 days later, the legal hammer fell. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a siege. Silas Sterling hired the most aggressive civil rights attorney in New York, a woman named Eleanor Stone, known in the press as the Shark. The deposition took place in a high-rise conference room in Manhattan. Sheila, out on bail, arrived wearing a neck brace, which she didn't need, and a modest cardigan, trying to look like a frail grandmother. She had a union lawyer with her, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Silas sat across from them. He didn't speak. He just watched. "My client," the union lawyer began, his voice shaky, acted in accordance with what she believed was a security threat. She made a judgment call. "We believe the termination was wrongful, and the assault charges are exaggerated." Eleanor Stone didn't even look up from her files. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "What is this?" the union lawyer asked. "That," Eleanor said, "is the log of Ms. Vance's internal complaints for the last 10 years. We subpoenaed Sovereign Air's HR records as part of the acquisition audit." She stood up and projected a chart onto the smart glass wall. "Sheila Vance has had 42 complaints filed against her in 10 years. 38 of them were from people of color. She has kicked off doctors, lawyers, and students. In 2018, she called the police on a Nigerian diplomat because she didn't believe his passport was real. Sovereign Air buried these complaints to avoid scandal. But Mr. Sterling owns Sovereign Air now. And he doesn't bury trash. He takes it out." Sheila's face went pale. I was protecting the plane." "You were protecting your ego," Silas finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "You looked at my daughter, saw her skin, saw her hoodie, and decided she was trash. You stripped her of her humanity because it made you feel powerful." "I didn't know who she was," Sheila cried out, the grandmother act dropping. "If I had known she was your daughter, and that," Silas interrupted, slamming his hand on the table, making everyone jump, "is exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who her father is to treat her like a human being. If she had been a scholarship student with no father, would she have deserved to bleed? Would she have deserved to be scarred?" Sheila had no answer. "We are adding a civil suit for $50 million for emotional distress and permanent nerve damage," Eleanor continued. "And since Sovereign Air is indemnified against employee negligence of this magnitude, the airline isn't liable. You are, Ms. Vance. Personally. I don't have $50 million, Sheila shrieked. Then we will take everything you do have, Silas said coldly. Your house, your car, your pension. You will never retire, Sheila. You will work until the day you die, and every paycheck will be garnished to pay for the therapy my daughter needs because of you. Meanwhile, Rick Garrett wasn't faring any better. The Federal Air Marshal Service, desperate to save face, threw him to the wolves. He was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the zip ties, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Because the victim was the daughter of a billionaire media mogul, the district attorney didn't offer a plea deal. Garrett was facing 10 years in federal prison. The tough cop, who liked to hurt people, was about to go to a place where he would be the smallest fish in a very dangerous pond. The karma wasn't just hitting them. It was crushing them. Winter descended on New York City with a vengeance that year, wrapping Manhattan in a shroud of grey slush and biting winds. But the chill in the air was nothing compared to the frost that had settled over the life of Sheila Vance. 6 months had passed since the incident on Sovereign Air Flight 902. For the public, the viral video had been a week-long sensation, replaced eventually by the next scandal. But for the people involved, the timeline had been frozen in that galley. Maya Sterling sat in the back of a black town car, watching the snowflakes melt against the tinted window. She looked different than the girl in the hoodie. She was thinner, her cheekbones sharper, and her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. She wore a tailored black wool coat, high-collared and severe. Her hands were gloved, resting in her lap. Beneath the leather gloves, the physical scars were fading to white, but the internal damage was still screaming. Maya was left-handed. The deep lacerations from the zip ties had severed the sensory nerves in her radial cluster. Despite 3 surgeries and months of agonizing physical therapy, she still had a persistent tremor. She looked down at her hands. She had wanted to be an architect. She had spent 5 years building a portfolio, dreaming of drafting skylines. But you can't draft a straight line when your hand shakes. That dream had died on the floor of a Boeing 7787, killed by a woman who thought she was just following protocol. Maya had formally withdrawn from her architecture program 2 weeks ago, switching to art history. It was a safer major, a major that didn't require steady hands. You don't have to go in there, Maya, Silas said from the seat beside her. He looked tired. The acquisition of Sovereign Air and the subsequent rebranding had been a war of its own, costing him billions and sleepless nights. But he had done it. I can have the lawyers read your statement. You can stay here. Maya shook her head. No, Dad. She looked me in the eye when she hurt me. I'm going to look her in the eye when she pays for it. The car pulled up to the Federal District Courthouse in Brooklyn. The sidewalk was packed, not just with press, but with supporters. Signs bobbed in the cold air. Justice for Maya and end profiling. When the car door opened, the flashbulbs went off like a strobe light storm. Silas shielded Maya with his body, his security team carving a path through the noise. Inside, the courtroom was a cavern of mahogany and tension. It was packed to capacity. Rick Garrett had already been dealt with. The Federal Air Marshal Service had cut him loose with ruthless efficiency. Stripped of his badge, his pension, and his qualified immunity, he had faced a jury that despised him. He was currently sitting in a federal intake facility, beginning an 8-year sentence for aggravated assault and civil rights violations. The tough guy facade had crumbled the moment the handcuffs, real ones, had clicked around his wrists. But today wasn't about Garrett. Today was about the architect of the nightmare, Sheila Vance. When Sheila was led into the courtroom, a ripple of shock went through the gallery. The woman who had stood so proudly in her uniform, sneering at a teenager, looked like a ghost. She had lost at least 30 pounds. Her hair, once dyed a harsh blonde, was now grey and pulled back in a messy bun. She wore a beige prison jumpsuit, having been remanded to custody after violating her bail conditions by trying to contact a witness. She didn't look at the gallery. She stared at the table, her hands trembling. She had lost everything. Silas Sterling's legal team, led by the terrifying Eleanora Stone, had systematically dismantled her life in civil court before the criminal trial even finished. Her house in New Jersey? Gone to pay legal fees. Her retirement fund? Frozen. She was bankrupt, divorced. Her husband left 3 months into the scandal and publicly reviled. The proceedings began with the usual legal ritual, but the air was heavy. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he knew he was fighting a forest fire with a water pistol, made a brief plea for leniency. He spoke of Sheila's decades of service and unblemished record prior to this incident. Then it was the prosecution's turn. The people call Maya Sterling to the stand for a victim impact statement. The room went silent. Maya stood up. She walked to the podium. She took off her gloves. She placed her hands on the wood, letting everyone see the jagged, ropey scars that encircled her wrists like bracelets of white fire. She looked directly at Sheila. Sheila refused to look up. "Look at me," Maya said softly. Sheila flinched, but slowly raised her eyes. "You didn't see me that day," Maya began, her voice gaining strength. "You saw a hoodie. You saw my skin color. You saw a zone on a boarding pass. You didn't see a person. You didn't see a daughter. And because you refused to see me, you took something from me that I can never get back." Maya lifted her left hand. It shook, a visible, rhythmic tremor. "I was going to be an architect," Maya said, fighting back tears. "I wanted to build things. I wanted to create safe spaces for people, but I can't draw anymore. My hand doesn't work the way it used to. The nerves are dead. You cut them." A gasp went through the courtroom. This hadn't been widely reported. "You took my career," Maya continued. "You took my peace. For months, I couldn't sleep without hearing the sound of those zip ties tightening. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was your face. It was the way you rolled your eyes while I bled. It was the way you smirked." Maya leaned forward. "I hope you have time to think about that smirk, Ms. Vance. I hope, when you are sitting in a cell, you remember that it cost you your freedom. I don't hate you. I pity you. Because you are so small, and your world is so tiny that you thought hurting me made you big." Maya stepped back. "That's all." She returned to her seat. Silas took her hand and squeezed it. The judge, the Honorable Justice Holloway, adjusted her glasses. She was a woman known for her fairness, but also for her intolerance of abuse of power. She looked at Sheila Vance with a gaze that could peel paint. "Sheila Vance, please rise." Sheila stood up, her legs shaking so badly she had to lean on the table. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years, Justice Holloway said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I have seen bank robbers, murderers, and fraudsters, but rarely have I seen a case of such casual, bureaucratic cruelty." The judge picked up a file. "You had 42 internal complaints against you, 42 opportunities to learn, 42 warnings. You ignored them all because you felt protected by a uniform and a union. You believed that your authority on that plane was absolute. You were wrong." I'm sorry, Your Honor," Sheila whispered, the tears finally coming. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Intention," the judge countered, "is irrelevant when the outcome is torture. And let us be clear, binding a passenger until they bleed, ignoring their medical distress, and mocking their pain is torture. The judge closed the file. The defense asks for probation. The prosecution asks for 7 years. I find the prosecution's request insufficient. Sheila's lawyer's head snapped up. I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed under the statute for assault in the 2nd degree and unlawful imprisonment. You are sentenced to 10 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served 85% of that time. 10 years? Sheila gasped, a sound like all the air leaving her body at once. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed into her chair. 10 years meant she would die in prison or come out an old, broken woman with nothing left. Furthermore, the judge added, twisting the knife of justice, I am ordering restitution in the amount of $5 million to be paid to the victim. I am aware you do not have this money, Miss Vance. This means that any income you generate, any commissary you receive, any inheritance you might stumble upon, will be garnished for the rest of your natural life. You will never again profit from your existence until you have paid for the damage you caused. The gavel banged. Court is adjourned. As the bailiffs moved in to cuff Sheila, metal cuffs locking behind her back, she looked wildly around the room. Her eyes met Silas Sterling's. He didn't blink. He watched her until she was dragged out the side door, her wails echoing in the hallway. Silas stood up and buttoned his jacket. It's done. Maya nodded. It's done. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere was very different. JFK International Airport was humming with the usual chaotic energy of travel. But at Terminal 4, something had changed. The branding was new. The tired, faded blues of the old Sovereign Air were gone, replaced by a sharp, minimalist aesthetic of silver, charcoal, and emerald green. Sterling Air. The name was everywhere. On the screens, on the uniforms of the staff, on the ticket jackets. But it wasn't just a paint job. The atmosphere was lighter. The staff at the check-in counters were smiling, and they were actually looking people in the eye. Silas and Maya walked through the terminal. This time there was no hostility. Staff members nodded respectfully, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They knew the story. They knew that the new owner had fired the entire upper management of the old regime and instituted a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. They knew that working for Sterling Air meant being held to a higher standard, but also being paid 30% above the industry average. Silas had bought loyalty with dignity and cash. They reached the first-class lounge. It had been gutted and rebuilt. It was open, airy, filled with natural light. You really went overboard, didn't you? Maya teased, though she was smiling. I told you, Silas said, checking his watch. I had to scrub the stain out. Bleach wasn't enough. I had to burn the house down and build a new one. He led her to the window. Your chariot awaits. Parked at the gate was the pride of the fleet, a brand-new Boeing 787-10 Dreamliner. It glistened under the airport lights. And there, painted on the nose of the aircraft in elegant flowing script, was the name, the Maya. Maya felt a lump in her throat. You named a $300 million plane after me. I named the flagship after you, Silas corrected, because you are the reason this company exists now. You're the compass. I don't know if I can do it, Dad, she admitted, her voice small. I haven't stepped on a plane since. I know, Silas said gently. But if you stay on the ground, Sheila Vance wins. She wanted to make you feel small. She wanted to clip your wings. Are you going to let her? Maya looked at her hands. The tremor was there, faint but present. She closed her fist, squeezing tight until the shaking stopped. She looked at the scars. They were part of her now. They were a map of where she had been, not a destination of where she was going. No, Maya said. She doesn't get to win. Then let's fly. They walked down the jet bridge. The entry to the plane smelled of fresh leather and citrus, not the stale coffee smell of the old flight. Standing at the door was the new cabin service director, a woman named Eleanor. She was Hispanic, warm, and radiated a genuine kindness. She saw Maya and didn't look at her hoodie, which Maya wore as a badge of honor now. She looked at her face. "Ms. Sterling," Elena said, extending a hand. "It is an honor to welcome you on board the Maya. We've been waiting for you." Maya hesitated, then took the woman's hand. It was a warm, firm shake. "Thank you," Maya said. She walked to seat 1A. It was a new seat design, more privacy, softer leather. But it was still seat 1A, the scene of the crime. Maya stood before it for a long moment. She remembered the air marshal grabbing her. She remembered Sheila's voice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Panic flared, hot and bright. "Just breathe," she told herself. "It's just a chair." She sat down. She buckled the seatbelt. Nothing happened. No one yelled. No one demanded to see a ticket she had already shown. No one grabbed her. Silas sat in 1K, across the aisle. He was watching her closely. "You okay?" he mouthed. Maya took a deep breath, inhaling the clean air of the cabin. She looked out the window as the massive engines began to spool up, a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. The plane began to push back. She watched the terminal slide away. She watched the ground crew wave. She watched the world that had tried to crush her recede into the distance. As the plane taxied to the runway and roared down the tarmac, picking up speed, Maya felt the familiar force of gravity pressing her back into the seat. Then, that magical moment of lift. The wheels left the ground. They rose above the Queen's skyline, above the grey winter slush, above the prison where Sheila Vance would spend the next decade staring at a concrete wall. They broke through the cloud layer into the blinding, brilliant sunlight of the upper atmosphere. The sky was an endless, perfect blue. Maya unclenched her fists. She rested her scarred hands on the armrests. She looked at the horizon, open and endless. She was broken, yes. She was different, yes. But she was here. Maya Sterling was flying. What a roller coaster of emotions. From the horrifying injustice of being judged for a hoodie to the absolute satisfaction of seeing a billionaire father shut down an entire airline to protect his daughter. This story is a brutal reminder that you never, ever judge a book by its cover, because that book might just own the library you're standing in. Maya's scars will stay with her, but so will the victory of knowing she changed the system. Sheila and Garrett learned the hard way that prejudice has a price, and sometimes that price is everything you have. If this story got your heart racing, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about instant karma, entitled People Getting What They Deserve and Justice Being Served Cold, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. What would you have done if you were Silas Sterling? Would you have sued, or would you have done something even worse? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.